So I actually get a pretty good gig here today. I've got 5 really smart people behind me, which is good because those of you who know me know that I'm not one of them. Meaning I'm not a smart guy, not I'm not one of them. In my breakout session yesterday with the manufacturing guys, one of the things I noticed was, or one of the thing I took away from it, was that about 2/3 of the people that were in the group hadn't been to one of these events before. How many of you guys, just show of hands, haven't been to one of these events before? That's pretty good. So, what do you think so far? I mean, yesterday you got to see a bunch of presentations talk about what's happening in the industry today. Again, from our manufacturing group, what we found was that everybody had pretty much the same issues, and they run the entire gamut from we don't know what the heck we're doing to my IT guys and my business guys don't talk to each other, all the way through. I've got a specific piece of technology I want to implement and I don't know how to do it. And so the great thing is that everybody's got the same issues. The bad thing is everybody's got the same issues. What we're trying to do today is here's a group of people that can help you with those issues. They're also going to tell you what are the next things that you're going to have to worry about. Yesterday, the other piece I took away was the one thing that everybody said in my group and on stage yesterday was mobile is not about a device. And as an ex-OEM guy, that hurt a little bit, number one. But it's also what we've been saying forever. You know, what we've been saying forever is the device is the device. It's all about what you do with the device. And it's all about getting information to the right people at the right time, doing what they need to do to make them do their jobs better. So that was the piece I took out of yesterday was almost everybody who was up here had a theme like that. It actually had, you know, it's more about the digital transformation. It's more about what people are doing rather than what they're using. So that was my takeaway. And we'll ask these guys what their takeaways are here in just a second. So what we've got going on right now, we've got 5 very smart analysts who are going to give each one of you 5 minutes of their time and talk about what they're seeing in the marketplace, what they're seeing as far as the next step for everything, where everybody's headed, what's going on. If you know any of these guys, you know that if I give them a microphone and a stage, they will all talk for 30 minutes. And we have 40 minutes total for all of them. So I'm going to have a 5-minute timer here, and I'm going to face it towards you guys.
Oh, we could all talk together.
And so what I want you guys to do, and I told these guys all about this last night, when there's a minute left, I want you guys all to yell 1 minute. When there's 30 seconds left, I want you to yell 30 seconds. Then I want you to count down the last 5. And we're going to make sure that whoever's talking sits down and the next person goes. All right? Like I said, if any of you guys know these people, you know why I'm saying that. So, first up, we're going to have Stephanie Atkinson. I won't start the timer till after you guys introduce yourselves. How's that?
Sounds
Is that
good.
fair? Okay.
My name's Stephanie Atkinson. I'm the CEO and founder of Compass Intelligence. We're an 11-year-old boutique market research and advisory firm, primarily focused on enterprise mobility and the Internet of Things. So let's see. Let's move along here.
Those are my slides.
Oh, these aren't my slides.
They're not in order, I guess. We'll have to find them.
Nope, they just, okay, great, thank you. So one of the things that we do is we work very closely with the OEMs and the carriers, and of course they are very focused on the enterprise this year, and they have been for quite some time. So one of the things I did, I was actually at a conference in the fall at IBM, and I wrote a blog. So some of the highlights from that I want to pull out and talk a little bit about for my 5 minutes, and then highlight a couple of research metrics and a couple of things that we're seeing in the enterprise mobility space. So the first thing first, that we talked about mobile devices not really being what we're talking about today, and that's mobility. The carrier becomes less relevant. For a very long time, the carriers have always kind of positioned themselves to be the quote-unquote owner of that enterprise. And we all know, especially those vendors out here today, that in many cases you have a whole host of vendors that are entering into the market space that are really making an impact and becoming much more relevant to the enterprise overall. So the carrier becomes less relevant. Also, content is king. we found that with all the mobile devices that we're carrying today, they're also becoming less relevant. And so in order to really drive our applications and the content that we're using on a day-to-day basis for our work activities, it's all about content now. And that is all driven around some of the topics that we've talked about today: cloud, APIs, and a couple other things that we're going to probably dive into through our sessions throughout the day. So the next thing is services are moving up the scale in terms of importance. It's less about our mobile devices and the things that we do with data. It's more about the services that we're getting from our vendors. And when I talk about services, I'm specifically talking about professional services. And when I talk about down market, in the past, there's been a very heavy focus on the large enterprise. We're starting to see these services with the availability of cloud technology. A lot of these great things that we use for our businesses are becoming relevant and much more adoption-wise easier for a small business to go and get those same types of services. I think we talked a lot about this yesterday with the API, so I'll skip through that. The last thing here, IoT becomes more plug and play. A lot of that's driven through some basic things that we use as a consumer: connected vehicle, connected home. But we're also seeing that the cognitive computing and learning, which we talked about that yesterday as well, are really changing the dynamics in terms of how we improve the user experience or the customer experience. So a lot of that is coming from basic things like sales, marketing, and you'll see that even in the retail vertical as well. So I want to move on to a couple of key metrics real quick. We expect around 3.1 million enterprise wearables. We have been looking at use cases around this in the government sector. Healthcare and manufacturing or industrial sectors are earlier adopters. So we're seeing a lot of activity there, so that's exciting, especially around the industrial side. Next thing, emerging vendors open up brand new landscape for chatbots and enterprise chat and messaging. We've been doing quite a bit of research around what's happening with some of these cool new vendors and entering into the collaboration space and really making an impact in terms of some of the traditional applications and software that we're using for enterprise. A couple of other things that we wanted to note, we're finding that the enterprises they're really looking for ways to cut costs, especially around mobility services. So don't expect to see, you'll expect to see quite a few vendors enter into the space. Even the cable operators offering wireless services this year. We're unlocking devices. We're looking at Wi-Fi first as a way for us to cut costs and having not to actually spend all this money on mobile data. So that's something that we think that we'll continue to see some competition around this year. Also, yesterday when we spoke with the Birds of a Feather group, we talked about IT and OT. So IT, information technology, OT, operational technology. We're butting heads now because as we move into this automation world and the Internet of Things and we're connecting our machines, we find that OT continues to want to keep a completely separate and secure network from IT and manage that separately. But as we continue to automate and we want to integrate this data into our processes and operations, we are finding that there is a strong push from the industry to integrate IT and OT. And then the last thing, huge theme of the week, security and cybersecurity. They remain top of mind for the enterprise. We're starting to see just a resurgence of those that are really looking at ways to really improve. Authentication was a big topic yesterday, two-factor authentication. How do we prioritize our applications for our end users and our customers? And also internally with our own employees. So that's my spiel and my 5-minute pitch today. Thank you.
I will give you guys time for questions at the end once everybody has their chance to talk. So up next is David Krebs.
Did it go over 5?
I don't know. I'm not timing.
Great, thanks. So my name is Dave Krebs. I'm with a company called VDC Research. We're a privately held technology research company, and our focus around enterprise mobility it's been going on for about the past 10, 15 years, and we really come at it from the perspective of particular industry pain points, so from a vertical market or industry perspective. So when asked to share some recent research with this panel, with this audience, we've been doing a lot of research recently into the retail sector, so I thought it would be relevant to come up with a couple of points with regard to what's happening in retail. It seems to be a very hot topic in how they're leveraging mobility. Ken, did we get the slides?
You should be able to.
Oh, there we go. All right. So, I think we can sort of unequivocally say that the combination of a functional mobile device and a intuitive application and access to critical data provides significant benefit to organizations. Be it workforce productivity, be it better engagement with customers. Our research has certainly proven that and has certainly evidenced that, and in talking to a lot of organizations, we certainly see that come to fruition. But in looking at the journey of mobility and in looking at how mobile solutions are being implemented, I think we're certainly seeing an interesting transition within organizations. One of those transitional points is, again, the shift from workforce productivity to customer engagement. But I think there's also a different shift that's going on that over the past 5-6 years, we've been really looking at how do I mobilize an existing workflow? How do I ensure that that workflow is optimized and is automated to the extent I can, going from paper-based perhaps to a digital forms-based application? So I think that that represents a first phase for a lot of organizations. And what we're seeing now, and it's happening at various stages by industry, but really we're talking about really the ability, not just for mobile, but to take these, the development around cloud, around analytics, to really truly transform businesses in the way that we see businesses operate. And I think that's that next level that certainly Maribel was talking about yesterday from the standpoint of pioneering things. So let's put this in the context of retail and the retail problem, so to speak. So last quarter we saw Amazon, and this is just their e-commerce figures, grow by about 30-35% quarter over quarter. So Q1 over Q1 last year. Whereas the traditional sort of brick and mortar industry grew by about 2%, 1.5% year over year. Now I think it's important to say, okay, online commerce or e-commerce represents about 8% of total retail sales. So the scale is clearly very different. But I think we have been looking at this and we have been talking about this for a long time about how do I address, as a traditional brick and mortar retailer, how do I address this pain point of the continued acceleration, the continued presence of Amazon and the likes. And because Amazon's not standing still either in terms of the services that they're providing. They're talking a lot about same-day fulfillment. They're talking even about creating their own sort of physical retail environments. So having gone to NRF and shows of the like, one of the things that we certainly have been talking about, and seems like for a long time, has been this whole notion of omni-channel. And the emphasis that we saw at NRF earlier this year was really about, again, how do I leverage, as a traditional retailer, how do I leverage my greatest assets, basically my physical stores, to create a greater or more engaging and more enriching customer experience. And so really the discussion has been about this bridging of this digital divide. How do I leverage my stores but still provide ways for my customers to have flexibility in the way that they're engaging and they're shopping with us. So that's the way that most retailers are addressing this, and a trend that we're certainly paying close attention to is this whole notion of buying online, pick up in store. In the UK, it's called click and collect, and it's certainly, when we're looking at how organizations are deploying that, we're certainly seeing greater scales of investment of these solutions. So these are statistics from a survey that we just fielded about amongst US and UK based tier 1 and large tier 2 retailers. So they're certainly looking at this as an opportunity to provide a better experience for customers across different channels. But there's been also a lot of what we would consider sort of very knee-jerk reactions towards this. A lot of Me Too deployments of BOPIS and click and collect solutions. And what we're seeing happening is, as organizations start to roll this out, they're exposing significant other issues. In-store inventory accuracy, absolutely. Lack of ability to interface with customers and directly communicate with customers. Inefficiencies in fulfilling orders. If I'm buying something online and picking up in the store, I don't want to have my traditional in-store experience. How is it being fulfilled in that store environment? confusion amongst customers as to where to go. I go to the store, where am I picking up my goods that I purchased online? So the store layout questions are significant. And then also, the rates of the return, this came up a little bit lower than I thought it would, but there's always been this competition within retailers, between sort of the online guys and the traditional store guys, in the sense that I'm buying something online, but I return it to a store, and the store then takes that liability. But the rates of return, obviously, are something that are increasingly important or increasingly need to be addressed. So this really exposes the real retail problem. The retail problem certainly, in terms of competition from e-commerce is there, but the real retail problem is fundamentally retail as an industry, as a sector, is still operating with huge levels of inefficiencies. And so average in-store accuracy for inventory is about 65%. So unless we address this, we can ultimately provide that seamless experience online. So a couple of best practices that we've seen: you have to optimize, BOPUS performance begins with having strong integrated inventory management, so you can't have these solid approaches. Ensuring that the BOPUS experience is consistent and isn't the traditional sort of in-store experience. Ensuring that the store layout is optimized for BOPUS. Policies for integrating BOPUS transactions with in-store POS systems so you can manage that return aspect. Distribution best practices, where am I fulfilling from? That goes all the way back to, ultimately, inventory management, supply chain management. Leveraging mobile to communicate with customers. If there's something is not available, how can I text them and how can I communicate with them what the status is? And then fully leveraging the upselling opportunity that is available as someone picks up an online order in the store to make advantage of that physical inventory. So that's what I have. Thank you very much.
Next up is Kevin Benedict.
I'm going to talk about digital delusions, but before I start there, I want to thank Jack and Bob for giving me your guys' time too. So yeah. So I'm Kevin Benedict, Senior Analyst for the Center for the Future of Work at Cognizant, and I get the privilege of studying a lot of data, as my colleagues and peers here do as well. But one of the studies we just completed was done with over 4,000 individuals, 2,000 C-level folks were involved, about 500 mid-level managers. We partnered up with Rubini Thought Labs. Nouriel Rubini is a Nobel Prize-winning economist, and I'm just going to give you a little preview of data that just came across my desk this last week here. When we look at the impact of digital transformation on industries, this is what the data, as I was just sharing, reflects. In total, there's actually 3 different pieces of data I want to highlight here. There's the impact, the revenue impact of digital transformation today. That'll be on the left of each of those columns there. Then today's potential, which means if you were doing the things that you know you should be today, what would be the impact on your revenue if you were doing those today? And then the next one is 3 years from now. What do C-level folks expect the revenue impact to be of digital transformation? Let's just take a look at that. So financial services, you can see 6.5%. That's what they believe or credit the impact of digital transformation on revenue today. But they believe they could be at 8.2% revenue impact if they were doing the right things today. And in 3 years, 9.9. So you can see there's a significant impact there over the next 3 years. But right now, if they were doing the things, there's a big potential impact. Manufacturing, again, you see a similar 5.4% impact today, but it could be at 7.5% today if they were doing the things they knew they should. Healthcare, also significant. Retail starts to get more interesting, especially when you look at, the numbers are just bigger. The potential for jumping up to nearly 13% revenue impact over the next 3 years is being projected. And in life sciences, it's less, but still those are meaningful numbers when you look at the profit margins, especially in retail. So this is the expected revenue impact here that we're getting. Let's look at now cost reduction from digital transformation here. Overall, companies expect to invest this year, invest next year, but over 3 years, they expect there will be cost reductions, and so there'll be an impact on cost, a positive impact. So it'll be costing less money. The ROIs will start getting bigger. So you can see that for financial services. So anytime you see the bar chart below the line, they're reducing costs because of digital transformation. Manufacturing, you see that in healthcare. Retail, though, is a bit different because of mobile commerce, omni-channel, and et cetera, They expect to continue to be investing more than all the other industries, yet in 3 years they still see at least a break even, so they're not reflecting additional costs because of that. And then in life sciences, again, that's a cost reduction play that they're seeing there. So you add what they expect the revenue impact and then the cost reduction, those are huge potentials there. But the title of my slide is Digital Delusion. And the reason is because we don't work or compete in a it's a zero-sum, we can look at it as a zero-sum game. Meaning we don't work in a vacuum. When it's working for somebody, it's going to be taking business often away from somebody else. So even though everybody thinks there's going to be great revenue impact and great cost reduction, that's going to be for the leaders. It's not going to be left for the laggards. So that's really important to understand, because even when we do a separation, we look at the laggard category compared to leaders. Laggards think that they can also receive all these same benefits. Even though they're not doing it today, they don't expect to get to it for the next 3 years. They expect the advantages and the value and the ROI to just be waiting for them when they get there. That's not the case. That's delusional to think that. These are very time-sensitive things here. Let's take a look at this. We believe there's at least 3 different ages of digital transformation. This is 2016. I call this the age of disruptive transformation. If you look at the vertical line on that chart there, that's the 10% line. So the question, what they're looking at here is the impact of digital technologies has on their business today, 2016. So those that say, and what you're seeing here is how many of these executives say this has a large impact on their revenue this year. So we look at it, cybersecurity, it's at, 28% say that it has a large impact. Big data, mobile technologies, cloud sensors, social media collaboration technologies, and then we drew a horizontal line there. In the top red, anyway, it's the magic quadrant of Kevin Benedict. You look at the red area there, the age of digital disruption, those are the ones that have over 10% impact today. Let's look at 3 years from now. Suddenly you see just about all these technologies are having more than 10%, are reported at more than 10% as having large impact on the business. I call that the age of hyper-transformation. And this is very meaningful. If you look at mobile technologies, it went from 19 to 39%. Say it has a large impact on the business now. All the numbers have accelerated very rapidly, and 2020 is 3.5 years from now. So, if I go, let me see if I can go back. Yeah, this is today, this is 3.5 years from now. Let's look at 9 years, 2025. All of this now is having a major impact on the business. I call this the age of ubiquitous transformation. The important thing for all of us to recognize here, going back into this to today, is that there's a lot of technologies we read about today that are less than 10% of executives say they're having a large impact on business. That continues to accelerate until it gets massive and ubiquitous. This is on a time frame. And this time frame is not waiting for your budget priorities. This time frame is not waiting for you to get done with your SAP implementation. It's happening without you or with you. And all of us need to recognize these kind of time frames there. So the delusion is that you can wait on your own time scale, and the value and the ROI and the revenue advantages will be there. What are the biggest problems? Mid-level managers say moving too slowly and lack of clear digital strategy, and I'm done. Who's next?
J.Gold up next.
Thank you.
There will be time for questions at the end.
Okay, let's see. There I am. Okay, so I am J.Gold. I am the founder and principal analyst at J.Gold Associates outside of Boston, and I've been an analyst for way too long. So let me get into these slides. We're going to have I've got a few slides here that I'm going to go through very quickly. Happy to answer questions afterwards on them and go into more detail, but I thought I'd throw up a few topics, particularly around the mobile app challenge. Let's talk first, this is some data that we did a survey on, and we asked companies, hope you can see this from the back. If you can't see this from the back, this is why you're supposed to sit in the front, folks. But we asked companies when they thought they would have the percentage of mobile workers they would have in place, and within 3 years, greater than 50% of companies said that they will have near universal mobile access for their workforce, meaning that they will all have devices of some sort, which means that in 3 years, if you're not there, you're well behind the 8 ball. But there's a real problem with this because IT spending is really not keeping pace. What we found was that 2015 IT priorities, we're not that far away from 2015. We're into 2016 now, I understand, but I'm trying to give you a little perspective on what went on in the background. Mobile was no longer at the top. 3 years ago, if you talk to enterprises, IT shops or line of business, mobile is at the top investment level. It's no longer there. It's usually 3 to 5 places down. They're talking about cloud, they're talking about big data, they're talking about analytics, certainly talking about security. Those are usually the top 3, not necessarily in that order, but that's what they're usually talking about. Mobile is still important, and it's related to all of the things that I just talked about, but it's not at the top of the list. Spending increases are going to be modest at best in most organizations. 3 to 5% is what we found for increase this year. But apps remain a real priority for most organizations, mobile apps. It's all well and good to get the devices out there. That's the easy part. It's getting the apps to users that are actually able to do something with those apps on those devices. And mobile spending also, we've found, had some new outlets this year. It wasn't in devices, it wasn't necessarily in apps, it was in Wi-Fi, and network upgrades, security, management, et cetera, et cetera. So what we found was, or what we're calling the Great Mobile App Challenge came along. I'm hoping you can see this little cartoon. It's supposed to be a little bit funny. If you can't read it, it says, how does computer programming work? And the guy on the left says magic. And I think that's very much true for mobile for most people as well. Most corporate apps are not mobile ready, even though most companies say that they have mobile apps in place. If you look at the percentages of what they've done, it's trivial. It's 5 or 10%, 15% in some cases, maybe even less. From a mobile app perspective, it's also been very focused on skilled app development, doing the big projects. Now that's okay if you're Bank of America and you've got to get an end user facing app to 10 million users. If you're doing an app for your workforce and that it's a sales force of 100 people and you're spending $1 million putting that together and spending a year doing it, you're doing the wrong thing. You need to be focusing on good enough, not perfection for your workers, good enough to get the job done. That doesn't mean it can be garbage. I was going to use a different term. I was going to use a technical term, but you can't put out garbage, but you can do good enough so they can get the work done and they'll use it. Typically, we find organizations take 6 to 12 months to get mobile apps out in the field. You can't do that. By then, it's outmoded. That's 6 to 12 months of lost productivity. What you really need to do is get an app out in 6 weeks, not 6 months. Okay? If you're not focused on getting the mobile apps into users' hands quickly, then you're losing major productivity advantages. Now, what are companies actually spending? This is also from a survey that we did. And we asked them, within the percentages, how much are you spending on apps? And we found that, for the most part, the single largest budget range for mobile apps in organizations was $1 million to $5 million. Now, this is per app, folks. This is not, general everything I'm doing. That's ridiculous if you've got 100 users in the field or even 1,000 users in the field. That's $50,000 a user on a mobile app. That's a lot of productivity that you've got to get back to get an ROI. In addition, what we found in talking to companies is that most companies have this backlog of apps that they want to mobilize that they can't get out. At best case, in most companies we've talked to, 10 to 15% of the backlog actually gets mobilized, and the other 85% are still waiting in the back room to get done, in the queue somewhere. And companies really need to find a new way, a new paradigm of getting these apps out there. I would ask a question, but I can't see the people in the audience very well because of the lights, but how many people have apps waiting in the queue, in the background in your organization? That's it? Doesn't look like very many. Wow, I'm impressed. You guys are much better than the industry average. Congratulate yourselves. Anyway, why is this important? So let's throw some numbers at this. We really need to rethink mobile. We always talk about rapid application development, RAD. That's been the key word for years. What we really need to think about is not mobile application development. It's rapid application deployment. It's the full life cycle. It's from the start to getting it out to people. It's got to be good enough. It's got to be line of business centric. It's got to be preserving the investment. And we threw some numbers together here for 100 workers. If you're delaying, I can give you all the background. We did a white paper on it. Ask me afterwards, and I can send it to you. But if you delay, based on what we've talked about here, 6 weeks versus 6 months, you can be costing up to $100,000 per 100 workers. Just by that delay, you could be losing that. If it's 1,000 workers, you're losing $1 million. So there really is incentive to get that stuff out there quickly. Let me quickly talk about this. This is another eye chart. I won't go through it in any great detail, but it's related. What are people actually using when they talk EMM? And I've got 26 seconds, so I'll talk very quickly. We asked what components they're actually putting in place. I don't think you can probably see these, and I won't go through these, but you'll get either see me afterwards or Phil will get the slides, and you can take a look at this. But people are buying in. The bottom line is people are buying these big EMM suites. Many of the components of the EMM suites aren't even being deployed. They're being deployed. They're not being used effectively. I just want to finish up with a security slide. Is anyone watching the store? We did a survey and asked people how many mobile security breaches they've had based on component laptops, smartphones, tablets. Don't know and never. 42% said they've never had a security breach. And 22% don't know. So 2/3, roughly, right? 2/3 of companies say they've either never had a security breach or don't know. That's appalling. If you talk to end users, 80% of them tell you, well, yeah, I probably lost data, but I don't want to tell anybody, right? It happens all the time. What does it really cost? This is another area that companies don't really concentrate on. What does it really cost? These are not even the up-to-date numbers. There's some newer ones out that I didn't have a slide for, but I'll put together. But the average cost for each lost or stolen record based on Ponemon research was $154. So the average consolidated total cost of a data breach is $3.8 million. So people who don't spend money on security are betting that they're not going to get hit with this $4 million problem. So it's imperative. In addition, 60% of small businesses, once they have a data breach, never recover. They literally go out of business. So there is a real incentive to do security. So I took more than my 5 minutes. My apologies. If you need to contact me, here's my contact information, and I'm not sure who's next. Bob?
Bob Egan.
Thank you.
Well, thanks. So I got about 30 seconds.
There you go, Bob.
So
I'll
everybody's
put any
I've
slides
given
up.
everybody more than 5. We still have more than 5.
I won't put any slides up. So here's what I want to press upon you, both from what I hear from my colleagues here, but also as CEO and research officer for Sepharim Group, we spent a lot of time with CIOs. And the one sort of common thread that I hear is that there are really only two rules of business in the 21st century. Either you're going to figure out what change looks like, disrupt the way you do business, or you're going to choose to be a victim. In a technology context, that means taking a look at a lot of these digital transformation technologies, really the portfolio. It's just not about mobile, it's about analytics. It's about how you are going to make the leap to cloud computing or some hybrid permutation. It's about analytics. It's also about ignoring a lot of these big surveys, with all due respect to a lot of the surveys that are being done here, about how companies in a particular vertical are actually operating. And the reason for that is, think about the retail sector. If before Amazon was born, and someone did a survey about what the expected growth rates and how we were going to deliver, and all of a sudden, what's the predictability that Amazon would come in and completely disrupt this business, right? Think about the hospitality business. who was doing a survey the year before Airbnb was born. And so really think about how you're going to be disrupted. Look across the portfolio of technologies that represent digital transformation and understand how you can help grow and thrive your business, knowing that you're going to be competing not with perhaps the incumbent that you always do battle with, but the new upstart that's coming along. Think about what's going on with General Motors. Think about what's going on with Ford. They don't think themselves as a transportation company, as an auto manufacturer, as much as they think themselves as a transportation company. Think what's happening in the rental car business. Does that even exist in 5 years from now? So you have to begin really thinking about out of the box. Mobile, yes, it's a component, but it's not really about devices. It's really thinking even beyond the app. One of the things we hear from a lot of CIOs, and perhaps why there were so few apps in the queue, is that as consumers and also as employees, we're all facing app fatigue. When we think about wearables, and wearables is coming, we're really interacting with a thing. We're not really necessarily opening and closing an app. We're not interacting with an app as much as we're interacting with what we want to do. In terms of business models, if you think about what you're doing today, maybe you're generating $10 or $20 per revenue per employee. Maybe you're returning $100 on the assets that you have invested. But you think about these new idea companies like Uber and Airbnb, and think about what the airlines industry is doing. How many of you have checked in or used a mobile app for your airline? Right? That's really the goal, right? This is an industry that we kind of love to hate, but here's a group of companies that have invested in analytics, cloud computing, and mobile, and made it work because we're reaching for them first. And that's the challenge, is to approach this digital transformation in a way that people reach for your services first, and that's how you're going to grow and thrive.
Phil, do we have time for questions? Any questions from?
Got you, George.
We can't see from up here.
George McQuillister, PG&E. So one of the things that's common thread here, you guys have talked a lot about transformation. I'm curious to know if any of you have seen any research or had any interaction with any enterprises, and what are you seeing in terms of how IT in business, or IT more more emphasized, is restructuring itself, right? So one of you guys had the slide up there, I can't remember who it was, where you basically said mobile was now down at number 4, right? Big cloud, data analytics, cybersecurity, they're at the top of the pyramid. How are organizations modifying or changing themselves in terms of how they operate to deal with that type of shift?
The first change I see is that traditionally CIOs have been investing and working in budgets and working with line of business and their CIOs about how they deliver capabilities. And they worry about how they have to invest in technology to make that happen. And CEOs and boards in general are much more worried about what are the outcomes. And so I think part of the digital transformation is CIOs and their immediate staff starting to think about what's the outcome in the business. And in particular, how do we drive more revenue? How do we drive more share? How do we defend our attack points from our competitors? And in general, it's really as much about what are the new technologies and how we implement them as how do we affect investment in technology to create impact in the business. And so it's both a technology implementation, but it's really also a digital transformation in that office about how we do business in the future.
There's also a different philosophy we're starting to see with CIOs and IT departments in general, and that is that in the past, if you look back 5 or 10 years ago, that was the nerd group, right? Those were all techies. You didn't understand what they were saying. They threw network cables at you or whatever you needed to get things done. It's much more, IT today in most organizations that we've seen is much more focused on business, to what Bob was saying. But it is a business function. It's seen as a partner as opposed to just nerds that you go talk to when you need something to get done. And so the restructuring it's not about just having IT people who are good at Windows or good at networking or good at mobile. It's also knowing a piece of why that will work and help the business. And CEOs and boards are looking at IT departments now to actually help them understand 3 years from now what our business is going to look like. So I think it's a fundamental change between being reactive in the past versus proactive into the business now.
And I would add, George, that I don't think mobility was going down as much as companies were recognizing that to support mobility, you have to do a whole bunch of other things. And Vivek from Any Presence and I were talking over breakfast this morning about the fact that mobility is not standalone projects anymore. They're being pulled into a much greater discussion. It goes up to the C-suite across IT and business, and they recognize that, look, yeah, our whole customer engagement is starting to move to mobility, but unless we figure out security, cloud, our data, analytics and all that, we can't take advantage of mobility if we don't figure out everything else. So suddenly it's a big discussion.
It's become a mature technology. It's the same place we were with client server 2 decades ago and web a decade ago, and now it's mobility. It's becoming much more mature, and becoming part of the overall discussion. I absolutely agree with you.
I would just add just one point, and I mean, we're seeing certainly a sort of cross-functional decision happening, and that's been happening for a while, but in the research and in talking to decision makers, what we're seeing is justification for the investment is becoming increasingly difficult, and really understanding, to your point, Bob, about how is this going to influence my business? How is it going to make me better not only today but tomorrow? And that's hard to do. I mean, that comes back as the greatest challenge is what is the ROI, and being able to justify that is a big barrier.
There's also a discussion now in some companies about what's the ROI of having an IT department. So in the past, I had to have it. It was infrastructure. It's like having a building. But is that enough? I'm investing this money in the staff. What's the return to the overall business value? And that's a different discussion than we had 4 or 5 years ago.
I would add, too, is that what we're finding is that our executives are really getting the point that some of the primary requests coming in from operational or logistics managers, or maybe it's someone who manages the HVAC system for that building, is that some of the technology decisions that are being made are coming from other groups and other areas that you rewind it 5 years back and everything technology was focused just in the IT department. And executives are really starting to understand and grasp that this is a technology decision that goes across our business lines, and that we also are looking for skilled workers for our IT department that get that as well. There has to be collaboration across the different groups. So that's a big shift that we're seeing. And so our future, kids that are in college now that are really focusing on IT skills have to really start to learn that the decision is being made across business lines, and there's a whole new mindset in terms of how you work together to really benefit from an actual ROI on a project.
And the truth is that if you don't like what IT is doing today, it's very easy to write a check to someone else and get it done outside of the company.
Digital transformation may not be sexy, but it's definitely a mandate, and it's coming from the deepest bowels of the organization.
Yes. And if I'm a line of business manager and you're my IT staff and you're not doing what I want you to do, there's 20 people outside that in the cloud that I can go to, or SaaS or whatever I'm going to do to get it done, and I'm just going to write them a check and ignore you, essentially. So it's a very changed, it's not a captive audience anymore. Sorry.
So I know that a couple of these guys are leaving this evening. The rest of you guys are going to be here the rest of the time. Find these guys. These guys can help you. These guys can answer questions for you. I said Bob and Jack, I think, are both leaving this evening.
I'm here today, yeah.
They're here today.
We're here till
so
6.
You've got time to get with these guys, so please do that. Thank you to the smart guys. I hope you learned something from them.